This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by Cadillac. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Cadillac Certified Service Fresh Start Tire event. Visit Cadillac.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by University of Northern Iowa political scientist Justin Holmes.
Hi there.
Hey, Justin. So, as always, there's a bunch of stuff that we didn't have time for on our weekend show, but we are ready to get to it now. And I thought we would start with, well, a bunch of education things, maybe starting with our wheelhouse, which of course is higher ed, and then we can kind of move on from there for K through 12. And so maybe you can get us going with the higher ed activities over the last week or so.
Yeah, so, this higher ed thing has been a lot of Trump focus. And I know you guys talked about it some last week with the Harvard situation, but, there is several EOs this week, one of which I think is particularly important and particularly troubling, dealing with higher ed in general. So, we've got kind of a number of things going on with Trump and higher ed. He comes in right away with grant funding and things, and then sets his sights on a couple specific universities. But several of the EOs this week, I think, are much further reaching. So the one that I think I'll start with is accreditation, which I think is probably sounds to outsiders tremendously boring, but I think is the most consequential. Having just been through accreditation, it is tremendously boring, but also tremendously consequential. But then also an EO about historically Black colleges and universities, and one on foreign influence. And those two, I feel like, are somewhat less consequential and maybe a little bit, to be honest, there's not so much there. But this accreditation thing is pretty big. So kind of to give a little bit of background, universities to grant degrees that are worth anything, and particularly to have access to federal financial aid, have to be accredited. And there's a series of sort of independent entities that do the accreditation right now. And so every so often, and now that I've been through, it's once a decade, I think it is, or maybe every 7 years, you're up for reaccreditation. And it's sort of like an audit, more or less. So you have kind of people that come in and they pull a bunch of records and things to make sure that sort of everything is on the up and up. And Trump has sort of hinted that he would go after this for really even during the campaign. There is, I think, a recognition that this is a sort of power center over universities. And also there are some things that he has specific gripes with. So one, obviously, is DEI, because any DEI is suspect for him. And certainly that was part of the accreditation standards, was to be able to speak to DEI, although I think we'll talk in a little more depth. In terms of actually requiring much of anything in action, there wasn't so much there. But his other concern is sort of accreditation for underperforming universities. So kind of as he announces this the other day, he cites kind of low graduation rates at some places and low pay for graduates and things, which is something that is already sort of looked at by the accreditors when they do this. But essentially, he wants to take them out of the game and move to a federal accrediting model that would, one, sort of place more emphasis on graduation rates, two, absolutely kill anything that smacks of DEI. But then third, it would essentially push for a standard of sort of intellectual diversity, also sort of ill-defined. And I think as a way of kind of undermining or, undercutting what some conservatives see as sort of monolithically ideological universities. So I have a lot of thoughts here, but I have talked too much already. So I think it's your turn for a little bit, and then I can come back to this.
Yeah, because how it typically works, there are these 6 regional accreditors that basically institutions are tied to geographically. So there's not really a choice. If you're in a certain area, that's your accreditor.
You don't get to pick your accreditor.
Technically. Though in 2019, Trump and then the Betsy DeVos Department of Education technically ended this monopoly because now all accreditors are national, and you can, if you're an institution, choose your accreditor, but you don't necessarily want to do that. In fact, almost no institutions have switched accreditors from the old system because, well, then you could be in funding limbo if you're not accredited by your new, and your old is maybe not in the, and you don't want to necessarily jump just to jump because it's a big, expensive process. That's how it works, is that institutions pay the accreditors tens of thousands of dollars a year and then more for the actual site visits and reports and all that sort of thing. So it's nothing.
And I would add that the man hours involved in doing the work is huge. I mean, I wasn't directly involved last time we did it, and I still probably had 15 hours of stuff to do, just a faculty member.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
It's a burdensome thing, and so, yeah, you don't want to take it lightly.
And so that's the model that we have. And one of the things that supposedly, that the Trump administration seems to think, and that comes out in this executive order, is that somehow competition for accreditors would be helpful, which to me is a bizarre concept. I mean, why would you want, if you think this through, why would you want competition for a standard setting body? That seems weird, because what you're going to get invariably is a race to the bottom, right? It's like back before the financial crisis, when you had financial institutions, well, still now actually to a certain extent, being able to choose their credit rating agencies. So if Moody's won't rate my crappy security, AAA, well, then I'll go to Fitch, or I'll go to Standard & Poor's. I'll go somewhere. And then all of a sudden it becomes in the financial interest of these accreditors to have lower standards and make things easier for the institution. So actually competition is the last thing you want here. But yet somehow Trump seems to think it's going to lead to better outcomes, which is just, I can't follow that logic even a little bit unless it's like the most basic, well, competition is always good. But in this case,
nail on the head, I think. Yeah.
How could it possibly be? And if you were going to do that, okay, if that's your logic, well, then, well, again, I don't think there's any logic to it. And so I think that if you're concerned about DEI, if you're concerned about accreditors not doing what you think of as their job, then fine. Just say, you know what? Let's cut out the middleman. Let's make the federal government, the Department of Education, the single national accreditor, at least when it comes to federal financial aid issues. Then you have uniform standards. It eliminates duplication, right? More efficiency. Trump's supposed to be all about government efficiency. And then the government directly has all of this information on all of these institutions, as opposed to these third-party accreditors having it. So that's something that Trump seems to want, is to get all this information on. So I think the only problem with it, of course, is then it gives more for the Department of Education to do. And of course, if you're a conservative, part of being conservative is you believe the Department of Education should be ended by any means necessary. So you can't do that, I guess. I don't know.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
There's a paradox there. It's like they want to slash the administrative state, but then do a bunch of administrative state stuff. So, yeah, I think this. This is the one that really concerns me out of these, and it pushes a number of my buttons. As far as kind of perception of higher ed. One is just in general, and a part of this might be the campus that I'm at, but kind of the outsider vision of what life on a campus looks like is just so far removed from anything that I've experienced. So many of these alleged problems really don't seem to be problems that much. This whole DEI thing, they closed our DEI office that was pretty toothless anyway. That was a state level thing. But, it seems like there's this sort of characterization of universities that just doesn't line up. But I think with this accreditation stuff, they're kind of going for the jugular here on some level. And it feels like, again, it sort of misunderstands what accreditors do and kind of their role. A lot of this seems to be DEI driven is the sense that I get. And I think this is all coming not from Trump, by and large. All of these higher ed things, it's from people that clearly know a lot about how higher ed works, which he does not, in terms of like the indirect costs with the grants and things like that. That was such an odd thing to start with. That's clearly somebody that knows a lot about what goes on at universities in the nitty gritty. But, thinking about kind of risks to accreditation, he's pitching this, I feel like publicly at least, as, the accreditors are forcing universities to do DEI undefined yet again. But if you kind of look at the track record here, and frankly what goes into this, most of what the accreditors are looking at is financial. That is sort of the big thing. It's a process level stuff, by and large. And if you look at places that have lost accreditation or run a risk of accreditation, I can't find anybody that's lost accreditation for not doing DEI right. The places that lose accreditation, it's over the last 5 or 10 years, they've all been for financial insolvency. It's the you can't admit students anymore because you're going to run out of money in the next 6 months, kind of stuff. And so, it feels like kind of this, at least as the way the problem is being framed, is very much kind of making them out as a boogeyman. And I don't know if that's that's how they think the world works, or if this is more of a, we're trying to kind of get an in so that we have more control.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's it.
I can't make heads or tails out of that.
I think you're dead right there, because this is a solution in search of a problem. I think for the most part, and I think it is, or
a solution in search of a different problem that they're not stating publicly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's just about exerting control, because just to be clear, if you're a university, a college in this country, and you lose your accreditation, that's game over for you. That shuts off your federal financial aid. That's the biggest thing. And any kind of federal grant money or anything. So you're done. And so that is basically your lifeline. And how could Donald Trump see that lifeline to these institutions that he believes, and rightly so, are incredibly hostile to his entire agenda? How could he not take advantage of that potential for control over that? So I get it. And I even get the arguments. Some people on the right would say, well, listen, these schools are violating civil rights laws. The argument on the right is that DEI stuff isn't just a bad idea. it's illegal. It's violating the civil rights of white students, of non-minority or of non-minority students, essentially. And it's not, on the face of it, not a crazy argument. I think it's certainly an argument that's, if I were a judge, I wouldn't throw out on its face, but that can be dealt with in other ways, and certainly is. This is not the way to go about doing that, I don't think. But again, if you have an opportunity to take a shot, to exert some control over these institutions that you hate, that hate you, how could you not do that if you're Donald Trump? So I get it. It's just, a bad idea.
Yeah. And I think one of the problems, I got Jay to concede this at one point, who is not a DEI fan, but this point I got him to concede is that one of the troubling things here is that DEI is undefined in all of this discussion. Because I think there are things done in the name of DEI that maybe, not only aren't good ideas, but might be problematic. But none of this explains what any of that is. And, again, kind of the accreditor standards, they want you to speak to DEI, but they really didn't impose any specific programs, in the past. And frankly, a lot of, there aren't a lot of conservative universities, but none of them have had problems getting accredited. One thought that I had, this sent me to the internet, but, if you combine kind of two of his gripes out of there, lack of intellectual diversity and kind of low graduation rates and poor performance, the first place that I would move to end accreditation for would be Liberty. They have no ideological diversity, which I don't care about, but on his standards, that's a problem. But their graduation rate is dismal. Those are the kinds of places, I feel like he wants to, wants the opportunity to end accreditation for, Columbia or whatever, at least hold that as a threat for him. But, I think there are places that even by his metrics, I think there are places that maybe deserve a look, but they're not the ones that he thinks they are. It would be my concern. But, this lack of definition of what DEI is, I think so much of the discussion is really like pre-Bakke affirmative action, is I think what people think is going on. And that was a Supreme Court case back in the 70s that ended quota-based affirmative action. So, we haven't done that, in like 50 years almost. And I think that's a problematic thing. I don't think that's a bad idea to end that. But I don't think anything like that's happening under DEI at this point, and so it's this weird moving target that I don't know how you even comply with. And that was the part that Jay actually, he did concede that I was probably right on that, you at least need to explain what you're penalizing. So
we hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo, we're @politicsguys, or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,